Hi, this is Chip LoCoco. Welcome back to my podcast channel. Today, I'm thrilled to have Bob Neufeld. Bob is a narrator for audiobooks. Bob was the narrator for all of my novels. Just recently, Sicilian Melody, which is book 3 of my Bella Fortuna series, was just released on audiobook. You'll be able to find it at Amazon and also over at Audible. So everyone, I'd like you to meet Mr. Bob Neufeld. Bob?
Hello, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I have to say, I hear that voice and immediately I'm drawn to every single character in every one of my books. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, it doesn't get any better than that for me. Thank you.
Bob, before we get into your process and exactly what a narrator for an audiobook does, let me just ask you a few general questions. That is, where do you hail from?
I live in Wichita, Kansas. Now, I grew up here. I lived in New York City for 30 years, a couple of years in LA, and then I made my way back here because I can afford to live here.
As opposed to New York and another place.
Absolutely.
So how did you get into audiobooks?
Well, my creative stuff goes way back, and I was a singer and sang in church and went to school here for opera and voice and did a lot of theater. I thought, then I'll go to New York and conquer the world, and that goes the way it goes for most people to try to do that. I ended up in business and doing HR for 30 years or so in a couple of industries. Came back home, but along the way, my niece and nephew, who were preschool at that time, I found an illustrated Grimm's fairy tale book, and I recorded it for them, and so they'd have the book and the recording as they were learning to read. Jump ahead a couple of decades, my niece came to me and said, I still have that book, but I don't have the tape to play for my kids. Could you do it again? So I did it again and enjoyed it. And I was getting closer to retirement from business. And I said, you know what? I enjoyed that. It came out pretty well. Let me see what I can do on a more structured basis. And I looked around and I found a website called LibriVox.org, whose mission it is to put it to audio every public domain thing ever written, similar to Gutenberg on the ebook side.
Gotcha.
And they take all comers, you can record whatever you want. So I just plunged in and didn't have really good gear. My space wasn't all that good, but I could record Emerson and Dickens and Plato and a whole bunch of people. And gradually I got better at it. And one day I said, you know what? Maybe I can make, a couple of pesos at this. So I went to a site called ACX, which you and I both know well by this time, which is a subsidiary of Audible, which is owned by Amazon. And I put in my profile, I put in my samples, and that day, or the next day, I don't recall now, I got an offer for Tempesta's Dream from you. It was the first offer I got from any author to get paid for narrating a book. So you are the guilty party from whatever happened from then on.
Tempesta's Dream was my first novel about an opera singer who grows up in Milan, a young opera singer who's trying to pursue a dream to become an opera singer. And I remember audiobooks was kind of, sort of, I'd say, in its infancy, but it was definitely becoming very popular, unopposed to that now where it's exploded, correct? But back then it was kind of in its infancy, but it was definitely becoming very popular. And I knew nothing about it. And I knew I wanted to turn my book into an audiobook. And I remember I went to ACX and they would list all the different producers who you could find and make offers to and see if they would accept to do your book. And if I remember correctly, your little profile mentioned opera, Italian, opera, Italian, and one of your sample books was of all things, a Study in Scarlet, I believe, with Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
And I listened to it and I said, that's the man I want. And I sent you the offer.
Well, I'm forever in your debt. I mean, you got me launched, and I am forever grateful to you for that.
And because of that, of course, then then came A Song for Bella Fortuna, Saving the Music, and Sicilian Melody, all part of the Bella Fortuna series. And you were the voice on all 3 of those. And I will say that every review I've ever gotten for every audiobook always comments not only on your voice, which is phenomenal, but just also on the characterizations that you give to each character. And we're going to get into that a little bit during this conversation.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
So I want to ask you first off, so what is the process? I'm going to ask you this question, but I think I know the answer. As a fact, I know the answer, but this is the question most people ask me. When you get a project, do you read the novel?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm even a little surprised when people ask me that. You wouldn't, and when you think about it, you wouldn't expect people to know that. But
Exactly.
Particularly when fiction, all genres, but particularly in fiction, you do not. There are myriad stories of narrators who made this mistake. You get to the last chapter and you find out that one of the key characters has an Irish accent. And for some reason, it wasn't mentioned earlier on because it wasn't germane. And now you either have to just live with that or go back and reread it. The most famous story, and it may be apocryphal, I've never heard who the actual narrator was, but it sounds plausible, is somebody reading a fiction book that's based in New York City. And a lot of people have been to New York City. A lot of people live there, as I did. People are tourists. They go to Greenwich Village. They go to Soho. The street that separates Soho from Greenwich Village is not Houston, which is how it's spelled,
Right.
but Houston.
Houston.
And this person said Houston and caught an enormous amount of grief, as he or she should have. we have a town up the road here. It just shows the research you got to do, which is where we're going with this, I think. There's a small town, 35 miles northeast of here, which should be pronounced El Dorado. It's pronounced El Dorado.
Well,
and our main river here is the Arkansas River, not the Arkansas River.
Well, you're talking to someone from New Orleans. So when you do my next story from New Orleans, the street names here like Chapatoulas and Calliope, you're gonna have to do your research.
My research will be you. I'll be on the phone to you the first day.
So you read the story. While you're reading the story, are you thinking of characterizations and voices for the different characters?
Oh, absolutely. It just starts to form. As you see some description of the person, tall, short, dark beard, blonde hair, deep voice. In Sicilian Melody, there's a bunch of what I've made into deep voices. Hope they're differentiated. But yeah, as the novelist gives you information about them, about the characters, then it's kind of a amorphous thing in the beginning, starts to take shape, and by the end, you have it pretty much figured out.
So Sicilian Melody is about the return of the mafia after World War II in Sicily. And what I thought about your descriptions or your voice characterizations, the let's call them the evil mafia people, right? That deep tone that you gave to some of them was just, I thought, spot on.
Good. I was hoping you'd think that. And the thing about voices is getting distinct. There are two schools of thought out there, narrators. There are some that go the complete way and make a completely different voice for every character, and some of them are amazing at it. You really think there are multiple narrators. Others, just as successful, just make enough difference so that you know who's speaking. You can do it either way. I'm somewhere in the middle, depending on the material.
So after you read the novel and you make your notes, and in your mind you have kind of how you're going to proceed, then you go into the recording booth and you begin, correct?
Yes.
Do you normally do a chapter at a time?
It depends on the length of things. Your chapters, compared to some nonfiction I've read, where chapters can be an hour long,
right,
are pretty short. So I normally think about a period of time. So I tend to go into the booth for about 30 minutes at a time, take a 5 or 10 minute break, go back in, do another 30 minutes, stop at some logical point, and then build it up over the course of the recordings.
Gotcha. And I know basically the audiobook for I think my novel is 394 pages, is going to run us somewhere around 9 hours of recording time. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little over 9. It's closer to 10, I think, now that it's finished. Yeah, the number that the industry tends to use to help predict that is 9,500 words per hour. Can be a little more or a little less depending on the narrator and the material. but that's a pretty good ballpark to use if you're trying to estimate.
That's just recording time. That's not meaning the times that you had to go back and fix something or go back and redo it just because you didn't like the way it came out. Correct? I mean, it's a very time consuming process.
Yeah, the 9,500 is a finished hour of material.
Gotcha.
That's in its final state, 9,500 words. There are some really good narrators out there, some of the best that make a couple of mistakes, but in an hour, but just race through it. I'm not one of those. I make my fair share of mistakes just in saying the words, but also as I'm hearing myself deliver that character or that line, I think, I want to do that a little differently. You can count on, depending on lots of factors, an hour and a half to 2 hours in the booth for every hour of final product. And
do you have the opportunity? You go back in, of course, and listen to every chapter as they're completed, correct?
Yeah, I edit the whole. I'm one of those that does all the work start to finish myself. I don't, except for the proofing. You never want to proof yourself.
Tell me a little bit about the setup. Your booth is at your house?
Yeah.
And what is it?
It is a formerly it was a walk-in closet. It's about 4 foot by 5 foot with a normal seating, I guess 7 foot seating. It has 3-inch mineral wool, micro wool, rock wool, safe and sound, if you know that name from Home Depot, insulation around it, which has the best absorbent data or specs for low voices like mine. And I have a 32-inch monitor in front of me. I have the microphone hanging. I have 2 mics, one shotgun mic, Sennheiser 416 for any of your listeners to know stuff like this, and an Austrian Audio OC18, which are both pretty high-end mics. So you'll find them in a lot of studios. And I just pick one or the other depending on the project and how I feel that day. Well, of course, once you pick one for a book, you do the whole book in it. Otherwise, it'll sound slightly different.
Gotcha. Unbelievable. So the book is then completed and then submitted to ACX, and that goes through the AC. Of course, I at the same time as you complete each chapter, you're sending them to me as the author to listen, make sure I have, make sure I have any issues or want to correct anything. And then when it's completed, it's submitted to ACX and it goes through their process to make sure that there's no issues with it. And then you get, like I did this week, a glorious email from ACX saying your book is passed through our system and it is now available at Audible.
And the narrator has a big sigh of relief that day because we know this is life. Anything can go wrong. I've had a couple of those where I had to redo stuff after it has been published, which is not a nice thing to have to do.
Audiobooks, like I said earlier, have really exploded on the scene. I want to say they're up 25%. People are really looking and purchasing audiobooks. I think because of Bluetooth in today's world, with people with AirPods and everything in their ears, it's easy if you're taking a train somewhere or in your car, playing audiobooks for a long road trip. People really love listening to these stories.
Oh, absolutely. Some people just do audiobooks only now. You say, don't give me the ebook. I can't sit and read. I can't concentrate. I don't have time for that. I need to be doing something else while I'm absorbing a book. The big push, audiobooks have been around since the 80s when they were on actual real tape reels. Right. And they were mostly used to promote the actual book. So sometimes you'll find old ones that are abridged, which makes no sense to me. But the real, and then they got digital with CDs, but the real burst, the real explosion happened with streaming. Yes. Because now you can just download it with a couple of clicks of your mouse on your computer or your phone, and off you go. That was 2000. I think Audible came into existence around 2008, 2010, something like that. That was the big push.
I'll say I'm an old-fashioned, love reading the book. However, if I go back to my own little history, I remember in Britain they had released a Lord of the Rings. It was from a radio show way back in the early 1980s, I want to say. And when I was a kid, they put this out on tape. And I remember I got the entire cassette tape, and I listened to that thing all the time. And it was, voice actors doing telling the story. And I know, like I said, that was kind of I guess that's the basis from where audiobooks came from, right? It was kind of a radio type of, I guess, way to tell a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was also a way for back then. You'd get major stars to do an abridged version of Moby Dick or whatever, and
Right.
that was a way for the publishers to get people interested in their book, their regular printed book of Moby Dick, by having this little thing they paid some star to do. And
Wow.
then people said, hey, I can use that if I can get it into my ear while I'm moving, while I'm gardening or cooking or whatever.
So let
Uh,
me ask you these two questions. The first question is going to be, of course, not including my books. What is your favorite book that you've done yourself as a narrator? If you can name one.
um, 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 well, I did believe it or not, I did a recording of. I gotta give you more than one, but a recording early on of Grimm's fairy tales.
Right.
And you might not think of my voice for kids stuff, but it turns out it's kind of like Uncle Fred telling your kid story around the fire. And that Grimm's fairy tale book, I enjoyed doing it because you really go wild with the voices and the stories and all that. But it has also taken off. Now, I do all this was volunteer. I get no money from it. It goes out into the ether and anybody can use it. A number of people, I don't know who they are, I have no connection with them, have put this up on YouTube on a channel for people to listen to or follow the book. And I'm going to pat myself on the back here a bit. I went and did a little, there are several of my books out there, a lot of LibriVox books, not just mine. I did a kind of a quick add up of all the hits that those books have received, the chief
Right.
one being Grimm's. It's close to 10 million.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Now, I don't get any money out of that. People don't even know who I am half the time. But so Grimm, because it's taken off, and also because it was tremendous fun to do. At the other end of the spectrum, I've done it twice now, I'm going to do it again, is Socrates' Apology at his trial with Plato and the dialogues.
Really? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, my next little project of my own is going to be a 4 dialogue series. That'll be the second one, though, the trial and death of Socrates. And then the other one that I really enjoyed was A Christmas Carol, Scrooge.
Yes.
Which is a lot of fun.
It's such a glorious story.
Oh yeah, it is.
So my second question would relate more to, and you may not have an answer, but let me just ask, what book would you love to do?
If you can think of a series, I would like to do the major novels of Dostoyevsky.
Great.
So, Crime and Punishment, and I've done some of his stuff now. I know that's not a single book, but I still am, as much as I do contemporary stuff and love doing books like yours. I'm still drawn to the great ones. Not that yours aren't great, you know what I mean. But traditionally, the ones that have stood the whole test of time.
Right.
And my voice lends itself to those in some respect, so I kind of get into that. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question about your opera background. You said you studied opera, correct?
Yeah. Wichita State University here at that point, I don't know, it's been decades, but they had a really strong music department there.
Which I loved about all my stories. They all take place in Italy, and the little nuances that you would add with the Italian language in some places, or just Italian names, and the way you would spin a phrase really was blew me away from the very get-go.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed that. Was a great treat for me. Not only pronouncing the names, but also to a point, the songs, the arias that we were referring to, started to just stay in my head all day long. And for a while that was great. Then after a while it became, okay, let's move on to the next one. I've got Mascagni down. Let's go on to the next one. But it pulled me back into my old haunts. It has been wonderful.
And of all your characters, for me, the one that I would say, I guess touched me the most, right? and it's really Giuseppe Sanguinetti. He is the linchpin within all three novels of the Bella Fortuna series. He's a young boy in the first one. He's a middle-aged man in the next two. And I just think you really captured his entire essence, and you really helped tell the story of that entire series with your voice.
Well, he is my favorite character all the way through. I mean, a man of integrity. He's brave. He's compassionate. He's self-effacing, and yet he's leading these people, some of which would be lost without him, in this wonderfully beautiful town. I mean, how can you go wrong?
Yeah, and I will say, and I would say one of my other favorite characters, a smaller role in the midst of the entire series, but your voice for Pope Pius XII and Saving the Music, I thought was dignified. It had a lot of tension, and it really helped explain what his thought processes were through your voice, which is, I think, amazing to do so.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The thing to say there is that without the character, without the dialogue that you created, you're just sort of speaking into the wind. And so when there's a well-written character or well-written scene, it reads itself pretty much. And if you've gone around the block a few times doing narrations, the voice sort of comes to you. Huh?
I thought this would be a great point to stop and just play for the audience. This is a sample of Bob's work. This is from my novel, Sicilian Melody. It takes place in chapter 1. The two characters you're going to hear are Adriano Umbretto, the mafia boss, and his capabastone, Luca Speranza. Listen to how Bob develops this scene.
Adriano quickly relaxed and lowered the knife when he realized it was Luca Speranza, his 42-year-old confidant and capobastone, the underboss and second in command within the Umbretta Cosca. Luca stared at the scene before him and noticed his boss's bloodied pants. He lowered his lupara and hurriedly asked, "Don Umbretto, are you hurt?" "No, Luca. The blood is his, not mine." Luca sighed in relief as he quickly made the sign of the cross. "Is Francesca safe?" Adriano asked. "She is. Some of the men are with her." Adriano dropped the knife on the floor and then pointed to the dead man. "How in God's name did this scumbag get into my villa?" Luca gulped hard. He had worked for Don Umbretto for a long time. He loved him like a father, yet he feared him just the same. "We are still trying to find out, Don Umbretto."
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the voice of Bob Neufeld reading from my novel, Sicilian Melody. And all I can tell you is that the ability to create characters with your voice is magic. And for an author, it truly is awe-inspiring. So, Bob, let me ask this question. So if someone's trying to find your recordings, they can go, of course, to Amazon and just type in your name into a search, and all your work on any book related that's sold on Amazon or Audible will be found there. If they're looking for some of your stuff on LibriVox, correct? LibriVox.
LibriVox.
Where can they find those recordings?
They can just search Bob Neufeld LibriVox. It should pop up. There is LibriVox.org is the official site, so they can go straight there and put my name in the search box, and it'll all come up.
And if you're an aspiring author out there, or you are an author who's looking to turn one of their novels into an audiobook, and they would like to use your services, how can they go about finding you and hiring you?
Email is the easiest, or phone. Email is Bob. I'm real creative. Bob at bobneufeld.com. My phone number is 917-957-8960. I have a website, but it's down for some reconstruction right now, bobneufeld.com. So that will be out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But those are the easiest ways to find me.
Well, Bob,
also at Facebook at Bob Neufeld Voice.
Bob Neufeld Voice. Got it.
Yes.
Well, Bob, I hope my listeners will love this conversation as much as I did. I think it's fascinating to hear how, the process and just also just how does one go about putting a voice to a story?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and also to record your wonderful books. It's been a pleasure, and I hope there'll be many, many more.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. Thanks for coming.
All right, bye-bye.
Ciao.